Hey, how's it going? Uh, Today's Monday, new episode. So, I got a weird one today. I want to start by telling you about a situation that happened. And I'll kind of get into the whole thing because the one part corresponds with the other. So, years ago, when I moved back from San Diego, before I went to Hawaii, before we went to Yellowstone, I had this thing. I was working a job where I was doing telemarketing, and I was like just mindless jibber jabber on the phone, and I started making these doodles, and the doodles were basically they were like, it's hard to explain, they were like geometric shapes. Like if you were to take the doodle and fold it in half, it would be identical on both sides. If you fold it in half again, those sides would be identical too. And the way I looked at it, because people would ask me, what is that? I don't understand what you got going on there. And so I came to the realization that it could be a building if you're looking down from above. We just have a lot of detail and a lot of little roofs, I guess. But that was the best thing I could come up with at the time. And I had this really nice drafting table, and I had a T-square for it. And so one day I made this decision to take one of these doodles and put it to a scale and basically draw it out on a big square. And so I did that. I traced it out first, and then I put it down with, like, I think a pen. Then I used markers. Then I gave some of the shapes colors, and then I ended up coloring the whole thing in. And it took hours. It took hours and hours to do. And that night, when I went to sleep, I had this crazy realistic dream. I'm pretty sure that I pulled somebody else into the dream with me. The person that I had this interaction with, I never spoke to again after that, so there was no way for me to ever confirm. But it was so real, and it was so vivid and so intense. The next morning I woke up and I was just like, wow, that was the most insane dream I've ever had. So I decided to do it again, and I bought a bigger board, and I got more colors, and I got a more intricate doodle, and I did it again. And this one took like 8 hours. I did it till late in the night, like 3 o'clock in the morning. And that night I had this crazy dream. I mean, the dream was so crazy that I guess technically I'm still waiting for this dream to come to fruition, and maybe it has metaphorically, but in this dream, in the beginning part of the dream, I was with Joey, and we were kids, not like little kids, we were like younger than that moment in time. So in that moment in time, it was before I met Sarah, so I was in my early 20s. It was before I went to Hawaii, which was 95, 96. So like I was in my early 20s. And I'm pretty sure, I'm sure it was before I went to Hawaii. But anyways, so we were younger than that time period. So we were like late teenagers in this dream. And the dream started out with, we were in a cave, and there's a waterway in this, like a little pond inside this cave, and like these rocky walls and dirt walls opened up to like a little beach, and on top of that beach area were people, a couple of people But up the wall above the beach was a window, and in that window you could see guys in like lab coats, and I'm basically walking out of the water in this cave, and I look to my left, and Joey's walking next to me, and he's in a trance. And then I realize there's more kids with us. We're all teenagers, and everybody's in a trance but me. And I'm looking around, and I realize that the people are startled that I am not in a trance. And I don't remember anything else after that specific incident. But in that part of the dream. And then the next thing I know, I am I'm in a car, and I'm being taken somewhere, and everything is cloudy. Everything's super cloudy outside. And I get out of the car, and Joey's there, and now he's old. He's older. Well, actually, before I get to that part, what I realized and what I knew in the beginning, which was never said, it was just like the information was there, which was that Joey and I were part of some experiment, and we were going to be sent 5 years in the future. We were going to live for 5 years, and then we were going to come back to the original day and live the 5 years that we missed, and then go back. And the idea was, by living out those 5 years and coming back to the original day to live out the 5 years we missed, we would be able to tell them what we saw in the future, and then, the events. And then at some point we would skip back to where we had left off. So we would live the full 10 years in the 10 years time, but it would be jumbled. And I think that coming out of the water that day was one of those, either the first 5 years or the second 5 years. I don't know. Yeah. So anyways, that's important to the story. So in this dream, everything's cloudy. I pull up. Joey's standing out front. Auntie Shelly's there. And the one of the important things about this dream is what happens. The very first thing that happens when I see them, which is Joey cracks a beer and hands it to me, and his mom's saying, "Are you sure you should give him that?" And him saying, "Yeah, he'll be fine, and me taking it and sipping it, and them talking to me, and everything just being super cloudy, and me not really saying much. And we walk into the house, and the particular house that we walk into, a house I'd never seen before, had a big, like a picturesque window in the front. I want to say it was probably California. I remember the house was yellow. It had a really nice lawn, kind of like my grandmother's old house in Lakewood. Like the houses in that neighborhood. I know Auntie Shelly was there. I don't remember what Joey looked like. I just remember I walk into the house. I look to my right, and it's a big living room on the other side of the window. So we walk past the window to the door, in the door, into the living room. I look to the right, and there's that window, but it's the living room. And I look to my left, and there's a hallway. And on the other side of the hallway is Auntie Shelly, and she's cooking. And as this is happening, I look at the wall, and there's a big mirror on the wall, and I see myself, and what I see scares the crap out of me. I'm old. My legs and arms are really skinny. I got a big belly. My hair is like receding. I got hair missing in the back, and then I noticed that I've put too much product in my hair. Like I had put too much of something, and it was thick that you could see it. Like I was trying to groom myself, but something wasn't right with my head. And I just remember like it was super cloudy and I couldn't really focus. I couldn't really think straight. And at that moment, when I see my reflection, it's like all of a sudden something snaps and everything's clear. And I see myself and I'm old and wrinkled and I'm shorter. Like I had a stroke or a car accident, or I'd spent time in a coma or something. And I just remember thinking to myself, holy crap, I got a lot of work to do to fix this. And it was like at that moment I had got my sanity back, I guess you could say. I woke up and it really hurt me to my soul. Like it was a really difficult thing, because I was so confident that whatever happened in that dream was going to come to fruition at some point. And so I've always kind of been cognizant of that in the back of my head when I take long trips and, different things. People are like, oh, you need to get more sleep, whatever. Quit drinking energy drinks. You shouldn't jump off the roof. No, I'm just joking about that part. But anyways, so the reason why I decided to tell that story today is because I saw something crazy, and it reminded me of that dream, which is I saw an episode of The Y-Files when they were talking about these kids that the government sent into the future, into the past, that were part of this experiment. And the crazy thing about it is I started doing research on it, because I had heard of that before, but I didn't really make the correlation. And I'm not saying that I had anything to do with anything that had to do with the government or experiments or anything like that. I know that that is not feasible, but what I am saying is that that dream was oddly similar to what they described happened to these kids. And apparently, I think on the East Coast that were part of this program. And there's all kinds of weird stuff. Like there was another incident of a guy who never was in the Air Force, never had any kind of clearance, and one day he gets this job, and all of a sudden he's got clearance, and he's working for some alphabet agency at low level, and they turns out he was already in the system, and then the date range that he was in the system for would have put him as a young kid, and it didn't make any sense. And he starts asking questions, and other people start asking questions. Then he went to his parents, and his parents told him, yeah, you were part of an experiment, or you're part of a thing that the government did. I don't think he called it an experiment. I think they called it like a focus group or something. But I don't know. There's a ton of different people who have been part of this, or are familiar with this, or can tell. I mean, some of the stories were just insane. One of the guys was talking about a super similar scenario where he was coming out of a water, and he's walking up onto a shore somewhere, and they just did one of these jumps, and he looks to the left, and the guy to his left was named Barry Soetoro, and supposedly Barack Obama was part of this when he was a kid. And I don't know, the whole thing was really weird, and I always kind of found it to be that dream to like kind of resonate, in the back of my mind when I was doing specific, particularly dangerous things. Man, and I got myself into some situations in my life. There was a day where I'm pretty sure Chris and Eric were there, and I think Todd Terry was there when we went out on a big day in Hawaii, and man, we should have never been in the water. We slept on the beach, so we went out like nobody was there. There was no lifeguards. There was nobody there. There was like one other guy who got there and got into the water before we did, and that was pretty much it. And we were there when the sun came up, and it was like the first big day of winter. Man, I had no business in the water that day. I almost drowned. I was getting tunnel vision. I was blacking out at one point, just trying to get. And it was bad. It was a really crappy scenario. And then in the beginning of that scenario, I knew better than to swim toward shore. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have ever been, in the ocean on a big day, but especially in the bay. We were at Sunset Beach, and it's kind of like this little curve, and they always say that you swim at an angle, you never swim toward shore. And so I knew that. I went to high school in San Diego. We had lived there before. We had lived in LA. We spent a lot of time in the ocean. I always do that, especially when there's a lot of drag, you swim at an angle. And so I didn't do that at first. I panicked, and I was trying to swim for shore. And after a little while, I caught my breath. I got my sight back, because like I said, I was tunnel vision, and then I actually went back out beyond the break and sat out there beyond the break for a long time before I came in. I was scared, and I ended up waiting. I mean, I was out there for hours, and then finally I came in past the big break. At Sunset, there's two breaks. There's a closer break, which is regular size, but there's a bigger break in the back, and that's where I was at. That's where I wanted to do. That's where I wanted to be at. And the one thing I always tell people about that incident is when that wave broke over me, it was so loud, it scared the crap out of me. And that was pretty much the beginning of the end. The only thing that saved my ass that day was the fact that I had long hair, and it kind of gave me a buffer, so I was able to catch my breath, because I had lost my board, and I was kind of like body surfing for a split second, and I wasn't even thinking that board is going to pull me under in a second. I really just arched my back, caught my breath, and then I just put myself under. The second problem was there's always like 4 or 5 waves in the set, and that was the first wave in the set, so I had 3 or 4 behind it coming. So by the time I got to the top of the water and was able to get breath, I was tunnel vision, and there's a second wave behind it, and another wave behind that. I was eventually able to get to my board, and like I said, I panicked. But anyways, it's a tangent. But I don't know, I look back at these different things that I've been through. I guess I almost died a few years ago from that whole gallbladder incident. And then countless times I was in situations where people pulled guns and stuff like that, just fighting as a kid. I don't know, I'm at the point now where it's not as big of a thing, and I seen that Y-Files episode, and I was like, holy crap, that's crazy. And then, like I said, I did some research on it and found more information. I highly recommend the Y-Files. I don't know if you're into conspiracy theories. I seen that guy on well, first of all, when I first started watching it, I couldn't deal with the little goldfish. The goldfish thing just really bugged the crap out of me, and so I stopped watching it. And then I seen the guy on a podcast telling his story, and I don't know, and then I was like, okay, well, I'll give it another go. And then I subscribed to his channels, so now I get his content, and there's a lot of really cool, interesting things in there. And now that I've seen a bunch of episodes, the fish doesn't bother me as much. But I highly recommend it if you like to hear about conspiracy theory stuff, which I do. Anyways, hope you enjoyed. Stay prayed up.